Within the confines of an elusive cult, a vibrant alternative music community thrived, deprogramming themselves through art. Powerful live performances punctuate tragic losses to beautifully illuminate shunning by Jehovah's Witnesses. Witness Underground is the only documentary to humanize cult life and survival via self-expression. Consider supporting it in our last week of our Kickstarter campaign to get this film out into the world on common streaming services. With Kickstarters, we only have a few weeks to do it, and we're in our last days. The campaign's doing great, but we need you to make it all possible and get this film out into the world. If this is resonating with you, join this community, check out witnessunderground.com, get involved in a huge movement of change.
Hello listeners, I'm your speaker Casey, and as many of you may know, I am currently undertaking the Psychology of Coercive Control Master's course at Salford University. I hope that this course will make me more informed and better equipped for future projects and interviews on the podcast. In the meantime, I will be releasing renewed versions of older episodes with updates from previous guests. If you want to find out what I remember from the time of each interview and get in-depth updates from the guests, I've been writing blog posts as I go through older episodes and adding them to my website, cultvaultpodcast.com, which you can also find links to in the episode description. You can find links on my website for support on navigating recovery from cultic abuse, to learn more about how to help a loved one, or become more informed about the subject of cults and coercive control. My emails are still open, and I am carefully curating a list of guests to speak with once I am back to interviewing officially next year. You can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com if you'd like to get in touch. And now, on to today's updated episode.
Hi, Helen, and thanks for joining me again this week. How have you been?
I've been very well. How about you?
Yes, I've been really good, thank you. I've been really looking forward to catching up with you again and carrying on with our conversation.
Yeah, me too. So much more to explore.
The farm makes money by selling its CDs and magazines. It also gets a lot of its money from the members that join the farm. So you talk about a lot of people accruing credit card debt that the farm never intends to repay. And you yourself actually used the money that you were given after your degree to the farm. So talk us through a little bit how that decision came about and why you decided to do this.
Yeah, so the grant was $13,500. By the time I arrived, I had spent very little of it. I had slept in ditches sometimes and eaten trail mix because I didn't want to spend the money badly. It was a big deal for me to have this much. I had never had anything close to this much money. So I was really concerned about doing the right thing with it. So when I arrived, first I handed over $300 as what they called my seriousness fee or my apprenticeship fee. Just, it made sense because you don't want people just showing up and freeloading. You want to know that someone cares enough about taking part in the group to be willing to fork over some cash. So I did that and, not necessarily thinking I was going to stay there. Then over the next couple of weeks, people kept asking me if I was going to stay and indicating that they would be very excited if I did choose to stay. And from the time that I arrived, I didn't drive. I didn't know how to drive. I didn't have a vehicle. From the time I arrived, I was just with the Zendiks. I wasn't really talking to anyone else. I certainly wasn't interacting in person with anyone else. There was a telephone that I could use to call people, but it was in the farmhouse living room, in the busiest spot on the farm. So it was not easy to have a private conversation. So I was just immersed suddenly in this world where everyone believed that Zendik was the answer to all the world's problems and that this was the only way. And I really liked and admired these people. And I started to think, well, wouldn't it be amazing if I could just choose to stay here and kind of adopt these people as my extended family and become part of their tribe and learn to do all these cool things that they know how to do. And as I said, I was worried about spending the money wrong. So I thought, well, if I give it to them, they seem like they know what they're doing. They'll probably do a better job of spending it than I will. Also, I really wanted to belong. I wanted to kind of get closer in. And it seemed like maybe making this big donation, just handing over the money, would increase my credibility, increase my standing. And I had been hearing this line from the Zendiks that like this was the place. Like there wasn't a better place to go. There wasn't a reason to continue to explore because all the other people at all the other communes were just wasting their time. And I bought into that elitism. Like, yeah, I'm super smart. Like I found the place that's in the vanguard, you know? So that appealed to my egotism. I did have this streak in me of just wanting to be generous and wanting to give. And when I received a windfall, wanting to share it or pass it on, you know, and I grew up Catholic, and within Catholicism, there is a very strong strain of just going ahead and giving everything, just making a sacrifice and surrendering and knowing that you're doing a good thing and it will be okay. So about 2 weeks after I arrived, I told the Zendiks I would like to donate my money, and I did.
And did it help you with your position at the farm at all?
Well, nothing really happened immediately that was really obvious, but the woman who helped me make the transaction, she was a member of the family. She was someone who I didn't really talk to otherwise. She was very appreciative. She said the money had come at just the right time. Other people, other members of the family, of the inner circle, as well as Zendiks who were not in the inner circle, but definitely higher up than me, also expressed their appreciation. So I did feel like, yes, it raised my standing. But more importantly, it was my act of commitment. It was my pledge. I was going to stay.
And was it any time after this that you managed to move from the barn into the farmhouse?
It took a little while. I think I handed over the money in early November, and I moved into the farmhouse sometime in December, partly because the other woman living in the barn, in the outer part of the barn with all the Zendik guys, she was moving into the farmhouse, and she told the other women, if you don't let Helen move with me and you leave her as the only girl in the barn, she's not going to make it. I don't know if that was true or not because I was so invested, but she stuck up for me, and strangely enough, she actually prevailed.
What was the farm doing before it had magazines, before it had CDs?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the totality of their income streams, but the ways that I heard about them making money were, well, making money and just gathering resources were going to grocery stores and shoplifting, getting welfare, and growing pot. Oh, and also there was busking on the street. Like the Zendiks used to go to the boardwalk in Venice Beach in Los Angeles and set up a blanket and a banner, and Swan would dance and Wolf and the musicians would play music, and they would collect money that way. The magazine, I think, first came into being, I think it was the 1970s. It was called The Cosmic Revolutionist, and it was just maybe one sheet of paper, double-sided, mimeographed in the purple ink. It didn't start out as a major play to make money. It more started out as a way for Zendiks to go out in the street and have a social life, to go meet people in a way that supported the revolution rather than detracting from it.
So of spreading the message and seeing if other people would be interested in coming on board.
Yeah. Yeah. And just a way to talk to people, you know, who didn't live at the farm without selling out. The selling was certainly part of it. I had had a terrible experience selling in Charleston. I had been told that I was a drag and I couldn't sell anymore. I had actually walked out of the center of Charleston towards the highway and gotten a ride with this guy who was like, "Do you want me to take you to the bus station?" And I was like, "No, I'm going to go back and apologize and try to do better." But that was a terrible experience, and it caused me to lose confidence in my ability to sell. Like, what reasons I have to believe I wasn't going to just do that again? So I so I was really afraid of selling again. But another thing that precipitated my out, that was our word for that sort of thing, was I had been in a relationship with a man for a few months earlier in the year, and Errol had coerced me into dumping him, but I was still in love with him, and my heart was broken, and I hadn't found anyone else to be interested in the interim. So I was selling and doing my work and so on and so on. But I felt like the spark had gone out of my life because I had lost this love.
And was that a common theme on the farm, that relationships would be prematurely ended by Errol?
Yeah, I mean, either Errol would criticize the couple and tell them they were square and should go live in an apartment, or Fawn would do it, or somebody else, or the whole group would pile on. I mean, the dissolution of relationships happened in a number of ways. Sometimes it happened because one of the people left, or was sort of bullied into leaving. Usually when people left, they had been having a very hard time for a while before that. So relationships ended in all kinds of ways. Often there was an element of coercion involved. But the pattern was basically that they couldn't really last. Except in the case of Errol and Swan. Errol and Swan could have their monogamous relationship for as long as they wanted. And then after I left, Errol had, I believe, a nervous breakdown around 2007, 2008. Swan took greater control of the farm, and she decided to get married. So, and once she got married, then a bunch of other couples also got married. So that was a very firm shift. At that point, it became okay to be monogamous.
But the time that you were at the farm, obviously that wasn't the stance that they had. So you found yourself kind of going through these heartbreaking situations.
Yeah, over and over.
At this point where the spark goes for you at the farm, and you decide that you want to go and visit somewhere that you've been before in your life and see a little bit of the world and try and sort out the issues that you're having, so that you can come back to the farm revitalized and ready to spread the message a little bit more?
Yeah, well, I felt that by being at the farm and feeling this dullness and this loss of heart, I was dishonoring the farm. It wasn't fair to the farm to be there and to be such a drag. So I thought that I would go out and get a hefty dose of the death culture and have reaffirmed for me that I had no other options, and then I would come back and I'd be ready to fully commit. Also, there was this place I loved, the Sawtooth Mountains, and when I signed up to live at Zendik, I kind of felt like I was agreeing never to go to these beautiful places that I loved. And so, and I just felt this pull, like I didn't have heart for the things I was supposed to be doing at the farm, but I felt like I did have heart to get myself out to the Sawtooth Mountains, that I could do that, and that somehow that was going to help.
and you do manage to get there, and you do see the mountains, and you do have time there, and you reconnect with family members and old friends, and then you do decide to go back to the farm. And how is that? How did that feel? Sort of going and returning back there. Did the break help? Did you feel like you needed to return? And how did you feel when you did return?
I did feel like I needed to return. I felt that the longer I stayed away from the farm, the weaker I was getting. I felt that the farm was the source of my strength, and I needed to get back there in a way in a sense to save my life. Towards the end of this 2-month out that I was on, I went to visit one of the communities that I had considered visiting before going to Zendik. I was on my way to visit that place. I had taken the bus from Idaho to Missouri, and since I had done tons of hitchhiking before, I thought, well, I'll just hitchhike the last 60 or so miles to this community. On that hitchhiking trip, I was sexually assaulted, and the story I told myself about that was it had happened because of my weakness, and that my weakness came from being separated from the farm. So to me, this was a sign that if I didn't go back to the farm as soon as I could, something worse was going to happen. And I also believed in this Zendik concept of psychic cause and effect, which meant that everything that happened to me, I had, quote, vibed into it. I had attracted all of it. So I believed I had attracted this assault in order to make it absolutely clear that going back to Zendik was a life or death proposition. So I did go back. I called Errol. I groveled. She said, okay, I could come back. And when I got there, I once again felt like a leper. You know, for example, I took the bus. My mother sent me money for a bus ticket. I took the bus to Spindale, North Carolina, and I had called the farm, and they knew when I was arriving, and I was told to call when I got to the bus station. So I called, and I was told, oh, just wait, someone will come pick you up. And then I called again, and so on and so on. And I ended up waiting for hours, and nobody came to get me. And when I first came to the farm, also I had to wait at the bus station for hours. That first time, I didn't see it as a value judgment. But the second time, I knew I am being made to wait because I am worthless right now. And then when finally I was told to just take a taxi. So I spent the rest of the money I had in my pocket on a taxi, and I got there, and like, for the most part, no one would look at me. Like I was a traitor, and Errol was the only one who could kind of make it okay for other people to take me back. And she did talk to me. She wasn't super friendly. And then right after I arrived, there was this meeting where some of the higher ups said that I should go. So I had to fight my way back in. I had to be really determined about it. And I was, because I was terrified of going back into the death culture and meeting another guy like the one who had assaulted me. And I thought that's what awaited me if I were to leave Zendik again.
That part of the story was so difficult to read, and I felt as though there were some parts where, like, I was there with you, especially when people were just sitting you down to when you were waiting at the bus stop to be picked up, and it was really, those parts of the book were really difficult to read. Do you feel like this happened to anybody else? Was anybody else made to feel this way? Was it a recurring theme of sort of the worthlessness that people would feel in order to try and gain Owl's appreciation, or how did that work? Because it felt like it was just you on your own, and it was horrible.
Well, I don't think this was peculiar to me. We all took turns in the doghouse, and we all took turns fighting our way out. That was part of the deal.
When you took your break, you were able to decide on the surface without consequences to take that break, whereas if you've been there a bit longer, you actually have to pay for a vacation.
When I first went out, after I'd only been at the farm for a few months, I went back to Brooklyn to see my mother for a few days. That out did not have consequences. That was considered okay because I was new. I was going to check out my options. I was going to see if Zendik was really what I wanted. That was totally okay. But by the time I went out for my 2-month break, I had been there for more than 2 years, and it was not without consequence. And I knew that. I very much felt that when I made the decision to go, that I felt like as soon as I said that I was doing that, I had shifted from the us column to the them column. And I could feel that, and I was desperate enough to do it anyway. But I thought I would be gone for 2 weeks, once again, I'm only doing it for 2 weeks thing. So, and maybe if I had come back within 2 weeks, I wouldn't have had to fight so hard. But yeah, it took longer than that.
But you did fight, and you did feel like you gained your place back into the group, because actually you and Errol developed a kind of closeness once you'd returned after a while. It seemed to be that there was like a level of friendship growing between the two of you at one point.
So I think of life at Zendik similar to being on a Ferris wheel, and you're on the wheel, and the wheel's going up and it's going down, and you might spend some time at the top, but you're going to come around to the bottom again eventually. So my experience of closeness with Errol happened around the spring and summer of 2003. So at that time, I had been at the farm for almost 4 years, minus my 2-month out. And I was in a relationship with this man I call Crow in the book. We had been together a couple other times. We've been together. We've broken up. We hadn't broken up under duress. Actually, Crow was the one who a lot of people thought that I was meant for and should be with. But we had broken up. So after when I returned from my out, one of the things that I thought I was returning for was to finally make it work with Crow. And eventually we did get back together. And then we had a fight, and we kind of, were breaking up, and Errol asked me what was going on. And I said, well, we had this fight, we can't be together. And she said, well, how about if I help you? How about if I mentor you? Your problem is that you go for relationship advice to people who don't know any more than you do. She said, you and Crow could be the model Zendik couple. And I was like, great, sign me up. And Crow agreed to sign up as well. So for a period of a few months, I was going to Errol for one-on-one counseling about my relationship. And she told me, like, if you have a problem, you have to come see me. I was always very scared to go see her, but I did. And she would give me advice, and I would, go forth and use it. So I was in her good graces for a number of months, and I certainly enjoyed that experience, that bump in status, but I could also feel that it was precarious. I was constantly afraid of fucking it up, saying the wrong thing, approaching her too often, not approaching her often enough, and so on. And eventually I certainly got, bumped back down to the bottom of the Ferris wheel. So it wasn't, there were moments of intimacy, I suppose. It wasn't really a build towards something. It was just a way station before, the next instance of being dumped. She said that she told the group, you guys think that Helen and Crow are doing great at their relationship because they talk to me, but they need to talk to other people, they're square and so on. And then this was in context of another of my selling disasters in which I had not done well, my rest of the crew hadn't done well, and I was blamed.
You were blamed for the bad selling because of your relationship with Crow?
Yes, that was what Errol ended up attributing it to. And there was a small connection, because part of why the selling trip went so badly. So occasionally at the farm we had alcohol parties. Generally we didn't drink, but just as sort of a release valve, we'd occasionally have these parties, and we would get a rationed amounts of alcohol, like 2 beers or something, and we stay up later and so on. And so the night before this really big festival, we had one of these parties. We all stayed up late and drank and stuff, and I went and had an impromptu date with Crow, and I was asking him all these questions. I was treating him like an oracle. I was asking him all these questions about, like, will this couple stay together? Will this person leave? And so on. And I asked him a question about one of my crewmates, and he said that she was going to leave. And I ended up bringing this up because the thing about being at Zendik was I believed in thought crime. I believed that if I had a bad thought in my head, even if I didn't do anything with it, it could still harm me and harm other people. And so I felt compelled to confess this. What if it was true? What if this person was on her way out and was bringing us down? What if it wasn't true and I was just an asshole, but this thought was eating me alive? So I said this, and then that ended up being the thing on which our entire failure was pinned. And it wasn't that wasn't an asshole move on my part. That was an asshole thing that I did. It's absolutely true. But we were all so fucking tired that day. One of us wanted to be there, So yeah, it sucked. But that was just sort of the spark that that set off the fire of the end of my period of grace with Errol.
She actually ended up being diagnosed with cancer at one point during your stay.
Mm-hmm.
And she used a large amount of money that is raised by the Zendiks for her treatment.
Yeah, she was diagnosed with advanced ovarian cancer. She had surgery to get the cancer removed just at a local hospital. She probably had Medicare. I believe she was old enough for that. But then she wanted to complete her healing. She wanted to go to a clinic in Mexico that was run by this guy, Dr. Donsbach, who had been kicked out of the United States. Her story was he'd been kicked out of the U.S. because he was crowding the pharmaceutical companies. He may have been kicked out because he was a fraud. I did some research on him later on. But she wanted to go to this holistic healing center in Mexico to, really flush the cancer out of her system. And she wanted to bring a bunch of people with her in a couple RVs, and it was going to cost $25,000. And, we made, between maybe $3,000 and $10,000 a week selling. So this was, it was quite a bit of money.
And she said it was her devotion to the revolution that actually caused this ovarian cancer.
Right, because if it had been one of us who had gotten sick, we would have gotten the question of how did you vibe into it, meaning what bad thing did you think or say or do that caused this plague to fall upon you? But because it was Errol, the psychic cause and effect dynamic had to result in some way that she was too good, and so that's what she came up with, was that she just cared too much and was working too hard for the cause, putting too much stress on herself, and that's why she got cancer.
She was cured, and during her time away from the farm, there's a really heartfelt moment in your memoir where you speak about making a home video, and you sit in the farm together and you watch it as an entire community, and you're all sitting there and you're all like crying together with laughter. And that at that moment in time, without Errol on the farm, that felt like that was the utopia that you were looking for the whole time.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the moment Errol stepped off the farm, I felt terrible for thinking and feeling this, but I did feel more relaxed, and I could go over to the addition without tiptoeing up the steps. And then making that video, which was it was a hilarious video. It was basically a bunch of us totally making fun of our various quirks and neuroses, but in a really loving way, not in a living therapy kind of way, but just like taking it over the top. And it was our own idea. Someone had the idea. Other people were like, yeah, let's do it. And we had lots of skills. There were people who knew how to work video cameras and do costumes and sets and music and all kinds of stuff. So we all just threw in however we could. It was totally spontaneous. The decision to do that, and it was great fun to make the video, and yeah, it was so fun. And I feel like also the subject matter of the video about our individual quirks, which were kind of also what made us lovable. It was this experience of accepting and celebrating each other for who we were, and it was an experience of love made manifest.
That definitely came across in that part of the book. It was like a very heartwarming moment. I don't know if you did this on purpose, but I always felt like there was impending doom when I was reading the book. It always just felt like I was there with you, and I was like, I had like clenched butt cheeks the whole time, that kind of like, you're reading it and you're like, oh no, and you're like, some parts of it are awkward, some parts of it are like scary. So yeah, it was just, I don't know if you did that on purpose, but
I did try to make it a cliffhanger, and I absolutely wanted the reader to feel like you are here with me, beat by beat. You are going through what I am going through.
That, yep, absolutely, that came across. And I was reading it well into the night, thinking I need to get some sleep. I also need to know I can't sleep with this level of stress. I just have to get to the end of this chapter.
That's exactly what I wanted to happen, because I've had that experience with memoirs that I've read. I stay up way too late because I have to make sure this protagonist gets out of this horrible predicament. So that was like my favorite reading report ever.
There was a couple of moments of group meetings between just the women on the farm. It was a lot to do with you all checking if you were sort of within your fertile window.
Well, I guess how I thought of it was more like the tribe was going to penetrate you before your lover did, in the sense that you had to get this speculum inserted inside you to be checked for fertility before you could.
Seemed like quite a nice experience to be able to sit down with the women and just have sort of that girl time, so to speak, of just kind of being pally with the girls on the farm and having that time like away from the men, and just, that's kind of death culture-y though, I think.
I don't know. I think there were definitely good things about that. I mean, the group specking scene where all the women got together, that was pretty rare. That happened only periodically. Usually when I was getting spec, it would just be me and whoever else was also having a date that night. But yeah, it was fun to be with all the women, and it's just us women, and we're talking about sex, and we have our pants off, and we're looking at our cervixes and all this stuff. Yeah.
And then there's the moment where you are sort of initiated into the farm, where you have sort of almost like a ritual.
Right.
And I was wondering if you could talk us through what that looked like.
Yeah, so this was December 31st, 1999, right around midnight. This was the eve of Y2K. And really, nobody knew what was going to happen. Like, maybe there was going to be a catastrophe in the financial system. We didn't know. So we had this ritual. We prepared for this for weeks in advance. And I know this because we had to memorize this 3-part vow. And we spent weeks memorizing it and practicing it with each other. So the ritual took place in the dance studio. We were all dressed in like dark colors, like navy blue, dark purple, black. That was the dress code. We were all standing in a ring around this room. Swan was at the center. We took turns going to the center of the room with her and repeating this 3-part vow. That was basically a vow of loyalty to Zendik, saying, this is what matters to me. This is how I'm going to guide my life. I am a Zendik warrior. So we each said the vow, and after it was complete, Swan put a necklace around our necks. The necklaces were handmade. Each one had a copper and brass circle Z on it. And from that moment on, pretty much all the time, all of us wore these circle Z necklaces. And that was our mark. That was our signal to the world, like, we are Zendiks.
And do you think that was something that helped you kind of immerse into the narrative of the farm a little bit more and go out and, and sell with more passion and motivation towards the farm?
Yeah, I think that the ritual was important. Taking the vow and being really serious about it lent this weight to being part of this revolution, and then going out into the world with these necklaces as reminders of the vow and reminders that we were warriors. We were part of this warrior tribe.
And eventually there comes a point within your personal narrative of being on the farm, not that you want to leave, but you agree with the group that you should leave, and you do leave.
So when I first left the farm, I just felt I had committed horrible sins against the farm that I needed to atone for if I possibly could. I felt like they were the chosen people and I was the traitor and the failure. I remember I lived in Chico, California for a few months of that first year. I was working on a farm. And at the time, Swan had this cable access TV show that she was making. And there was a call for people living all over the country to try to get it on their local stations. And so I knew I couldn't just write to the farm or call the farm and be like, hey, just checking in, but I could have contact by doing something for them. So I wrote to them and I was like, I'll get Swan's show on this station. And I did, but it was just this sort of worshipful dynamic. Like, you're great. I'm shit. I'm not good enough to lick your boots. Then there was a tiny bit of softening that happened later on in that summer. Errol put out this album called Into the Oracle. And when it was released, she posted a note on the Zendik website thanking the people who had helped get her through cancer. And in this note of thanks, she mentioned both the people who are in close with her at the farm and the people who are scattered and far away. And when I read that note, I was like, maybe she means me. And I wrote to her just a very short email, something kind of worshipful. And she wrote back like one line. I don't remember exactly what she said. I think there was a bit of kindness in it and a bit of dismissal. That's my best recollection.
So you leave and you have this period of not being in the farm, but feeling like you should be in the farm, thinking of ways of how you can go back. And then you meet with an ex-member of Zendik and have a nice conversation with her about this haze that you've been in, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, before I had this conversation, things had been happening internally and externally to prepare me for it. I didn't realize that that's what was happening, but it was. I had been away from the farm for more than a year. Most of that time, I had been also away from my family and my home in Brooklyn. I didn't want to go back to Brooklyn because I believed my family was partly responsible for corrupting me. So why would I go there? But I did eventually make it back home. I was staying with my mother. I could sort of relax because I didn't have to worry about, food and shelter and the basics of survival anymore. And I had some room to think and write and feel. And a different ex-member got in touch with me, and I was able to talk with her honestly about Zendik because she had lived there herself. She had complimentary things to say about it. She didn't seem like a hater to me. And so I was willing to confide in her. And one of the things she asked me was to write down all the things I hated about Zendik. And I did, just in this very private way, like only she and I would see it. When I did that, I thought I was just sort of getting that poison out of my system so it wouldn't hurt me when I returned. But actually, it was important. It was important to write down and acknowledge there were things I hated about living there. I also had this thought process about the either or thing, that I could either call Zendik and grovel and maybe go back, or I could live my life feeling doomed. And that I had this thought, but wait a minute, the world is vast. It's not possible metaphysically that there are only two answers. There's got to be a third way. So my mind was changing a bit. Then my friend, who I call Leah in the book, Leah showed up. She was stopping in New York on her way to Paris from the Bay Area. And I didn't know what to expect. For all I knew, she was on her way back to the farm and she was going to get there before me because she'd always been a better seller. So I didn't say anything to her on the phone beforehand about going back or not going back. But of course, that was the number one question on my mind. What was she going to do? We were in the same predicament. What was she going to do? And she said, no, I am never going back. We're not fucked up people. That was a fucked up place. And I was like, whoa, really? You're allowed to think that? I kind of think that too. And so then we had this watershed conversation in which we sort of retold the story of our time at Zendik in significant detail from the perspective of, yeah, it was a screwed up place, which is not to say that either of us is a perfect human being, but that was absolutely necessary at that point to totally recast experience. And then she told me about the book, Combating Cult Mind Control, which her father recommended to her. And so I immediately went and found the book and read it and learned about the cult pattern. And that was incredibly freeing for me because I had seen Zendik as singular. There was nothing like it in the world. And I'm reading this book and I'm seeing how very well Zendik mapped onto this pattern as a whole, and even how it mapped onto the author, Steve Hassan's experience in the Moonies. And I mean, after the conversation with my friend, that was when I initially just felt absolutely overjoyed that I got to be free. Reading the book added another wave of joy. Just, I'm free. So deprogramming refers to a specific experience in which often someone will be grabbed out of a cult and forced to sit in a room for a long time with ex-members and such and just hear terrible things about their group and so on. It's a fairly coercive procedure. That's what I understand deprogramming to be. I mean, for me, how I would describe it is just that I was trapped for 6 years in a false story that was harming me, and it was totally real. It was an illusion, but to me, it was absolutely real. And this experience of having this conversation with my friend and reading this book just cracked open that story trap and allowed me to step out. And as the months passed, I did have moments of doubt just in my body. Like rationally, I didn't go back to thinking that Zendik was a world-saving revolution, but I just had moments of feeling like, once again, that I was a traitor and that I had done something wrong, and that there was this group of people in West Virginia, the farmers of West Virginia by then, there was this group of people somewhere who were just hating me. So it was certainly a process to extract myself, and there were also stages of the process. There was a period of intense anger, at Errol and the whole experience, which I think was very healthy and useful for me to express my anger in public, because it made room for other people who had lived at the farm to maybe feel some of those same things that they had been suppressing. And, and then over time, over the next many years, I was able to kind of compost the experience and turn it into a source of fertility and just keep on turning that pile. And now it's not that I never have difficult feelings about Zendik, but I rarely do. And mostly I just feel that it was a really valuable experience, not in and of itself, but because of what I made of it. If I had left the farm and stayed frozen as that person who thought I was an asshole and a traitor, that would not have been fertile. But because I was able to make something of it, I'm able to also treasure it as this source of insight into how people work.
Absolutely. And it seems as though, you're obviously an incredibly intelligent woman with a very strong will, and you've managed to come out of this experience and kind of flip it to almost be able to look at it positively, which is absolutely incredible. What advice would you give to others who may find themselves in this situation, who may be frozen after their experience of something similar?
So I think I would return to this metaphor of composting, that if you take your stinky guck of your trauma and you stick it in a closet or under a tarp, it's just going to get even stinkier and it's going to go anaerobic. But if you're simply willing to look at what happened to you, to tell your story as a person who is not any longer in the grips of that group, simply telling the story will start a healing process. And you can do that by writing it down. And if you do that, then you can promise yourself that no one is ever going to see what you've written. You can also do it by talking to someone you trust. For me, the first people I trusted were people who had shared that experience with me. I didn't trust people who had never lived at Zendik, because I had learned that, death culture people just wanted to rip Zendik down to avoid responsibility for doing anything about the state of the world themselves. So, I would say find someone you trust to talk to about this. If you can't find someone you trust, write about it, but also give yourself some credit, because part of what it takes to enter a cult is a willingness to try something different. And sure, that thing might turn out to be corrupt and harmful, but you didn't know that when you started out. You went in there probably wanting to change the world or have a better life or be of service or something. So give yourself credit for that, and don't be ashamed.
So just before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask you how you think this COVID-19 may be affecting people in the world. So do you think that the virus is going to be allowing charismatic people to entice members into groups, or do you think that it's actually because of the lockdown around the world giving people some cognitive dissonance to take a step back from maybe some of these groups and have some independent thought?
It might depend on the nature of the group. I have heard and read that there are plenty of cults these days that do most of their work over the internet. And in that situation, maybe you're sitting at home and watching even more Teal Swan YouTube videos and getting deeper in. If your group depends on in-person contact and you live communally, well, you're even more isolated with those people who are part of your group, because they're the equivalent of your family unit, the people who you're quarantining with. Those and if it's a group that depends on in-person contact, but people live in a more scattered way, then maybe you can't see each other, or maybe your leader is like, this is all a fake, and we're going to defy this and get together anyway. So those are some thoughts on the logistics of it. I mean, it's possible that upheaval and financial difficulty and desperation and other kinds of hardship might make charismatic leaders more attractive to people. Also, there is the factor of transition. Just being in the words of one of my favorite authors, Charles Eisenstein, being in a space between stories in a time of great uncertainty and just wanting another story to step into. Some people might take an easy out in that way.
Why did Errol have a whale tattooed on her face?
Why have a whale tattooed in her face? I don't know. A lot of Zendiks had tattoos. Tattooing was a big thing.
It was just such a weird place to have and a whale as well. I thought it was a teardrop at first, and then I read your book and I was like, oh.
Yeah. I mean, I think the there's probably something about the blue whale and something that's special about it. But I think having it on her face might have been just a way of signaling, like, I don't give a fuck what you people think of me. I got a tattoo on my face. Like, like if you have a tattoo on your neck or your ankle, well, you can hide it. And that's like the most out front place to have a tattoo. But I don't, I'm sure somebody knows, but I don't know why it was a whale.
So despite the spiritual and emotional trauma that you experienced during your time at Zendik, you're now happily married and you are in a positive situation.
Absolutely. Yes. And it's kind of ironic, because part of what kept me at Zendik was my belief that it was the only place on the planet where I could have a lasting, honest relationship with a man. And the opposite was true. It was actually the place where it was impossible for that to happen. Nonetheless, that was absolutely a true desire for me. That's something I've wanted, for a long, long time. And I did end up finding my mate, and we are sticking together.
which is fantastic because it's almost cliche to say like a story with a happy ending, but that is exactly what we got here. And obviously at the end of it, there's a very short chapter on, well, not even a chapter really, just explaining how Zendik came to an end. So I didn't know if you wanted to just briefly let everybody know where Zendik is today.
Yeah. So the farm moved to Marlinton, West Virginia in 2004, shortly before I left, to a place that was, well, in a sense, it was even more isolated than a place in North Carolina, just because people might come visit the farm in North Carolina because they were passing through Asheville or something, but no one was going to go to the farm in West Virginia unless that was their purpose. Also, in the farm in West Virginia, there was one big house that everyone was living in, so there was sort of just less breathing room. The farm it got even smaller after that. I think about 10 people left in the first year after the move. There were serious financial difficulties. It's quite possible that I added to those difficulties because I wrote an FAQ about Zendik that I published, I think it was in 2008. And once I made this very detailed information available about how Zendik worked, then anyone who ran into a Zendik on the street could just Google them and they could find this, and they might be like, well, we don't want to really support this. So there were financial difficulties. Errol had the nervous breakdown. Swan took over. They started making paper beads and jewelry to sell, extremely labor-intensive process, only works if no one's getting paid and so on. By 2012, when Errol died of a recurrence of her cancer, there were really not many people left at all. Most of those who were left were in couples. Some of them had children. And the farm was in serious financial difficulty. So there was a moment when some parents stepped in to try to help the farm out financially. And as part of this deal, at least a couple of the parents wanted it to be true that members of the farm other than Swan would have a say, would have their name on the deed, would have a say, would have some ownership over the property. And the people still living there, they'd all been there for a very long time, and they felt like they were competent and they deserved a greater share of responsibility. So there was a moment when Swan had the option of saying, yes, we're going to govern this thing together. And she said no. And this is all hearsay. It's what I heard from people who were there. I certainly wasn't there. But as I understand it, after that watershed moment, a bunch more people left. And by about 2013, the Zendik website was gone. It might have been gone as early as 2012. And the farm was pretty much empty. Swan and her husband and children moved away. I believe that the two of them still own the property in West Virginia. I don't know what's happening to that property, but they, as far as I know, they don't live there. So the property is there. Everyone has scattered, and there is a pretty strong network of former Zendiks who are in touch with each other and really good friends with each other. And I sometimes feel like, on a metaphysical level, the purpose of the farm, it lasted 44 years, that the purpose of the farm was to bring together this vast network of people who would never otherwise have come in contact with each other, to bring them in touch with each other, to weave them together like a loom, and then once the weave was complete, the loom fell away.
And even though the revolution won't happen with this particular movement, you still have lifelong friends and experiences that you will be able to draw on and share with people for the rest of your life.
That is absolutely true.
Fantastic. Such a crazy story. When I was reading it, I was thinking, oh, I'll read this. I'll just read the sample and I'll see how I get on. And then I couldn't find my Kindle anywhere, and I was like, I need to know more about this. And then I ended up downloading it, and I read it all so quickly. And I was just, I mean, it's fascinating that these things and these experiences are happening to people all over the world. And I'm almost curious how many people have had similar experiences, but it will never be documented and people will never know.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many people who have been in cults but don't know it, like just don't call it that because they've never encountered the pattern, or have been in a cult but like don't want to tell anybody. You know, it's like so rare that you're having a conversation. It's like, yeah, I was in a cult. This thought occurred to me when you were asking what I would say to someone who had just left the cult.
Mm-hmm.
Another part of the picture is that cults, like weeds, spring up to heal deficiencies in our cultural soil. If we all had all the meaning and purpose and belonging that we needed, cults would have no way to enter people's lives. And it's, of course, the cults don't usually end up delivering the meaning, purpose, belonging, etc. They simply pretend to deliver it. But again, in a truly healthy culture, they just wouldn't be able to gain a foothold. So I think that we can learn a lot about what's missing from the broader culture by looking at what the cults are promising people. And that's related to what I would say to someone leaving a cult, in the sense that I would say, you were attempting to meet real, true, valid desires by entering that group. Those desires, those needs are important. They are worth trying to meet.
So I will let you go and enjoy the rest of your day, especially considering that you're going to try and be as far away from technology as you can on the weekend. And I'm just stay in front of your screen. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I feel like I've learned a lot, and I feel like there were a few things that I had misconceptions around, and you've really helped me to clear those things up as well. So it's really handy for me to be able to get the experience and make sure that I'm approaching the subject as sensitively as possible. And I know that these things can't be easy for people to relive and talk about. So I really do appreciate you being so candid and taking the time to talk through everything with me. Anybody who would like to go and read Helen's book, I highly, highly recommend it. It is one of the most intriguing things that I have read, and it was a page turner. It was completely compelling. It's called Mating in Captivity, a memoir, and Helen's last name is Helen Zuman, so you can find it on Amazon, and I read it on iBooks through the iTunes store. And you can find more about Helen on her website, which is www.helenzuman.com. Go and read the book. It's absolutely fantastic. So thank you so much, Helen, for joining us today, and thank you for sharing your story. I really, really loved getting to know you and just listening and just getting to meet you in person. I'm like a fangirl.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's just been so great to talk to you. I really appreciate all your questions and your enthusiasm, and I think that you just might be my ideal reader.
Thank you once more, Helen, and I really hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Yes, you too. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.